In 1799, a mentally disabled boy named Victor was found alone in the woods, presumably abandoned by his family. When Dr. Jean Itard, a French physician, discovered the 12-year-old, he took responsibility for his welfare and education. The start of special education as a discipline is often attributed to Dr. Itard's thorough documentation of his experiences with Victor. Little is known about attempts to educate children with disabilities before 1799. The early 19th century was marked by Enlightenment attitudes toward special education, in which intellectuals championed more humane treatment. The publication of Edouard Seguin's reference book in 1866 marked the creation of the first special education program. Elements of Seguin's program, such as individualized instruction and behavior management, are still incorporated into modern special education classrooms. By the turn of the century, however, theories of Darwinism had infiltrated popular culture, influencing common perceptions toward people with disabilities. During this period, physicians such as Harry Heselden openly practiced euthanasia of what he called defective newborns. Dr. Heselden campaigned for the adoption of these practices across the country, gaining powerful support even among advocates for the disabled community, such as Helen Keller. On December 18, 1915, Ms. Keller was quoted in a periodical as stating, "It is the possibilities of happiness, intelligence, and power that give life its sanctity, and they are absent in the case of a poor, misshapen, paralyzed, unthinking creature. The toleration of such abnormalities tends to lessen the sacredness in which normal life is held. It seems to me that the simplest, wisest thing to do would be to submit such cases like that of the malformed idiot baby to a jury of expert physicians." Despite being an advocate for the physically disabled population, Helen Keller shared the views of her era that assumed people with mental disabilities could not live fulfilling, productive lives. During the first half of the 20th century, involuntary mass sterilization and institutionalization of people with disabilities was common. In 1927, the Supreme Court ruled in Buck v. Bell that sterilization was legal. Following this decision, over 60,000 individuals with mental disabilities were sterilized in the United States. Despite prejudiced attitudes, the White House Conference on Children, held in 1910, marked a slight change in how society believes students with disabilities should be treated. The conference recommended that children with disabilities be moved out of institutions and into public schools, but put in separate classrooms. The shift from isolation to segregation continued until the 1930s Great Depression led to dramatically decreased funding in all schools. By 1918, all states had instituted compulsory attendance laws. However, many state courts ruled that these rights to education did not apply to disabled individuals. Around this period, local advocacy organizations began to crop up all over the United States, forming grassroots support systems for parents of children with disabilities through which they could fight for equal opportunities.
In the 1950s, these organizations gained force on the national level to help further the case of special education. The Supreme Court ruled in the 1954 case Brown v. Board that it was unconstitutional to allow segregated education on the basis of a student's unalterable characteristics, such as race or disability. This gave disability advocacy groups a foothold on which to stake their claim. As a result, the National Defense Act of 1958 provided funding to colleges for training special education leadership personnel. The 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act provided additional funding and authorized the establishment of the Bureau of Education for Handicapped and the National Advisory Council on Handicapped Children. Despite the legal advances being made, until the mid-1970s, laws in most states allowed school districts to refuse to enroll any student they considered unreachable, a term that was generally defined by local school administration. As late as 1969, courts in North Carolina ruled that it was a crime for parents to continue enrolling a special needs child after exclusion from public schools. Fact: 1975. 3.5 million children with disabilities were still not receiving an education appropriate to their needs, while almost 1 million more were receiving no education at all. This all changed in 1975 with the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, PL 94-142, the first piece of federal legislation specifically covering students with disabilities. PL 94-142 required that all students with disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education between the ages of 5 and 21. It had provisions to develop an individualized education program, IEP, for each child. It was designed to the maximum extent appropriate, have all students with disabilities be educated in the least restrictive education environment. It also gave parents the right to participate in every decision related to the evaluation and placement of their child and required parental consent to do any kind of evaluation. The original PL 94-142 is constantly being altered and updated to ensure that the educational needs of students with disabilities are being met. The title of the Act was changed in 1983 and 1990 when it was renamed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA.
The 1990 IDEA amendments mandated that federal funds assist states in giving each child with a disability a free, appropriate public education. It also served as the precursor for later inclusion policies. IDEA 1990 reflected changes in perceptions towards people with disabilities because it altered the language of the law to be more person-oriented and got rid of the word handicapped. It also identified students with autism and traumatic brain injuries as a distinct class entitled to the law's benefits. The 1997 IDEA amendments assured that students with disabilities were included in state and district-wide assessment programs with provisions for appropriate accommodations. It also enhanced parent involvement in placement decisions and expanded IEPs to include a statement of measurable annual goals and short-term benchmarks to better track student progress. Disciplinary measures for students with disabilities were now included in IEPs, focusing on positive behavioral interventions, strategies, and supports. In 2004, IDEA was reauthorized as the IDEA Improvement Act. The most significant modifications were requirements for highly qualified special education teachers and the formation of IEP committees. In addition, the Act included an identification procedure for students with learning disabilities. The Act contained an emphasis on transitioning students for post-secondary education, requiring a strategy for achieving this goal to be added to the child's IEP by the age of 16. Post-secondary education for students with intellectual disabilities is offered at the College of New Jersey through the Career and Community Studies programs, which offer students a liberal art education with inclusive mainstream classes and CCS core classes. Research reveals that inclusion programs such as CCS at TCNJ are highly beneficial for all students. Furthermore, universal design for learning tactics have proven highly successful in inclusion classrooms. These involve giving information to students in as many different ways as possible in order to engage all kinds of learners. These teaching strategies are proven to benefit both mainstream and special needs students. Despite these statistics, the debate continues over inclusion. Where do you stand on this issue? As teachers, we will be faced with this question throughout our career.